Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Well, welcome back. Today we're talking with Jeff Roberts, and you may notice a little bit of a sound differential between my voice and Jeff's voice. Obviously, we're still dealing with the coronavirus and the restrictions that the governor's put forth. So Jeff is actually in his office in Murray, Kentucky, and I'm not. And we're kind of doing this remotely. So if you hear a little bit of a difference in the microphone volumes and the sound, I hope that's not a distraction to you. But we thought we'd rather go ahead and get out an episode. And I think everybody's kind of dealing with the shelter in place and social distancing. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
I am doing well. How are you doing today, Jim?
Hey, I'm well. I miss all my friends. Miss hanging out with you, buddy. So we'll kind of get this going. Today, as you and I were preparing for this episode, we thought, with the summer months coming in, obviously, ideally, we're gonna at some point get past this coronavirus, and traffic on the roads is going to be increasing as people get out and maybe try to drive around or maybe drive to places they haven't been for a while. And obviously, with that traffic increasing, we thought there could be more accidents, and people really kind of need to know or might want to be reminded about some of the important things they need to think about should that occur. Jeff, you want to take us through some of those steps?
Sure. Yeah, historically, the summer months, you have an increase in motor vehicle accidents out on the road, motorcycle accidents, primarily because more people are traveling during that time of year than they do in the winter time, or at least that's the reason I think that occurs. But so while accidents can happen anytime, you tend to see at least an uptick of those numbers in the summer months. And what people need to do if they're involved in a motor vehicle accident, obviously the first thing is to check yourself and check on any passengers in your vehicle to see if anyone is injured in the accident, and if you're okay, then obviously check on the people in the other vehicle and to see if they're okay. The next thing to do is to call 911 and notify the police of the motor vehicle collision so that they can come out to the scene, and by having checked yourself and the occupants of your vehicle and the other vehicle, you can let the 911 operator know whether you need an ambulance as well as the police out to the scene, or if just the police presence is all that is needed. And when you're there at the scene, the police officer will obtain all the insurance information and vehicle information from each of the drivers. It's best to go ahead and try to get that information for the other driver as well while you're still at the scene. It'll be in the police report, but oftentimes it can take several days before you can get a copy of the police report. So if you already have that information, it can speed up the process, especially if you're the person who is not at fault in causing the accident. Having that other insurance company's name and contact information can speed up the process of getting your vehicle repaired, and also can speed up the process on getting a claim set up so that you can get taken care of. If you are injured in the collision, then you need to seek medical treatment. Depending on the severity of the injury, you may need to go to the emergency room. It may be something that you can go to an urgent care facility or to your family doctor if you can get into your family doctor on a fairly quick basis. From that standpoint,
well, Jeff, what some people will get in these collisions, and if they're not severe, catastrophic things like that, they might think, well, okay, I could just walk this off. I'm feeling okay today. But a lot of times I've heard you say that really you still probably ought to go get checked out just to start a medical record that says, hey, you were in a collision and here's some doctor's feedback. How important is that?
I think that is important. You may not need to go that day But what will frequently occur is when you're in a motor vehicle collision, then you have, your blood's pumping, and you don't really realize that you've had an injury right off the bat. So I've talked with several clients who, at the scene, they didn't realize they were injured, but then as the excitement of the event goes down, then later on in the day or in that evening, they will start noticing that they've got some tightness in the neck area or pain in the low back or in another part of the body. Sometimes, especially depending on how close your seat is, people even with seat belts can strike their knees on the dashboard or on the underside of the dash and things of that nature that can cause knee injuries or hand injuries from the hands being driven into the steering wheel.
Right.
So you'll notice those either later in the day or the next day or two. You'll have those things come on. In fact, it happened with me several years ago when I was involved in a collision when an elderly gentleman pulled out in front of me when I was driving down the road, and right after I didn't really, other than having just a touch of a headache from the airbag deploying and the sound of the airbag more than anything. I didn't really think I had any other issues that were going on, but then later on that night, I had the neck pain and pain running down my hands, and found out later on that I had suffered an injury to my neck in that collision. So it's, I've not only had clients tell me about it, I've experienced the exact same thing myself in the past.
And I guess a lot of times you're obviously these kind of claims, these accident claims, these car wreck claims, motor vehicle accident claims, tend to come down to insurance. And I guess when you're negotiating on behalf of a client, the more documentation you have as to the extent of not only the property damage, how bad the car was banged up, that's easy to show, but sometimes the medical records really come into play.
They do, absolutely. The documentation of the injuries comes into play, and if the next day, I don't. When I say you need to go be checked out, I don't mean that if you're not having any problems whatsoever, then there's going to the doctor and saying, well, I was in this accident, but I'm not having any problems. There's no need to do that. But I've had a lot of people come into the office that, when they had the accident and then they didn't go seek medical treatment the next day when they were having problems because they thought, well, I didn't go the day of the accident, so now it's not going to be covered by the car accident insurance from that standpoint, and that's not true whatsoever. You can develop symptoms, actually, it can be a couple of weeks afterwards before you really start realizing or start experiencing some of the problems from injuries that may occur in these types of collisions. So, even if it's 2 weeks after the accident, if you started having some neck pain and tingling going down into your, a couple fingers and down into the arm, you need to go have that checked out, and you need to make sure you let the doctor know. I was in a motor vehicle accident about 2 weeks ago, and I've started noticing these symptoms now. And then the doctor can say, well, yes, this definitely could be from the motor vehicle accident, or they can say, no, it's from some other cause. But you let the doctor know and let the doctor make that determination, because that is a medical determination to be made.
And I would imagine the longer that span is from the collision to the time you end up seeking medical care, the insurance adjuster for the other guy is probably going to use that. Well, this could have been from a fall in the yard, or maybe you did something else that caused the injury. Again, they're in the business of saving money, not spending money.
Absolutely. They're going to do anything they can to try to lessen how much they end up having to pay out on the claim. So, if you go later that same day, they may make that same argument. They're going to make the argument that they're either going to make an argument that your problems developed after the motor vehicle accident if you wait a long time, or if there's somewhat of a delay in seeking any medical treatment, or frankly, if you go soon and then you've got a neck issue. Frankly, a lot of them are going to argue, well, he had a lot of pre-existing problems in his neck or her neck, and therefore, this motor vehicle accident didn't really cause it. So the insurance companies are going to make those type of arguments because they are, they are trying to pay as little out on the claim as possible from that, and that's one of the reasons you seek the medical treatment when you need the medical treatment, and then frankly, I think you seek an attorney to make sure that your rights are being protected and that everything's being done the way it should be done.
Well, I know with the cost of healthcare being what it is, a lot of people are worried about, wow, that's potentially another medical bill. I'm not feeling bad enough to have to go to the doctor, but Kentucky has a special benefit for people that are driving cars or involved in collisions, and the passengers as well. Do you want to talk about PIP?
Yes, and that was exactly where I was going next. And that is after after you've got the insurance information, if you have an injury, you've sought the medical treatment there the same day, right after the injury, and got seen about from a medical standpoint. Your next call should be to your own insurance company, your own car insurance company, to let them know about the collision. And a lot of people don't realize that they need to call their insurance company, even if they are not the one that caused the automobile collision. But Kentucky does have part of the Kentucky's motor vehicle insurance statutes states that the insurance companies, when they sell car insurance, there's certain mandatory coverages that if you have car insurance in Kentucky, you have these coverages because they have to write those coverages if it's a Kentucky policy. One of those coverages that's mandatory is frequently called PIP, or personal injury protection benefits. Another term for it is BRB, or basic reparations benefits. But
that's also no fault, right?
It's what's referred to sometimes as no fault, or the part of the No Fault Act in Kentucky. Yes, and essentially what that benefit is, the minimum limits in Kentucky are $10,000. So every person involved in that that's in your vehicle has $10,000 to cover medical bills and or lost wages when they're involved in an automobile collision. And the company that pays that is the insurance company that insured the vehicle that you were in at the time of the collision, and that's why it's called no fault. Before that law was passed, and it was passed in the late 70s, long before I started practicing, but the reason for it coming into being was because whenever there was a collision, if you had a disputed red light collision, one driver says, I had the green light, the other driver says, I had the green light, what you had was both insurance companies denying liability in that case, and nobody paying the medical bills for the people that were injured. So Kentucky's legislature put in this no fault and said it doesn't matter who's at fault, the vehicle that you're in pays the first $10,000, and every person in that has $10,000 of that coverage.
Yeah, you're not dividing that number up. It's $10,000 for you, $10,000 for you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if there's two people, it's not $5,000. Both of them have $10,000 of that coverage. And what happens later on, because some people say, well, that's not really fair that my insurance pays. What happens later on is when it's decided who is at fault, then the at-fault person's insurance ends up having to reimburse the other people's insurance, what they've had to pay out in no-fault benefits or PIP benefits there. So the insurance companies straighten it out in the end, but it allows the injured person to seek medical treatment and be able to get medical treatment, and also to seek lost wages. And frankly, that's one of the more important benefits from that type of no-fault coverage, because most people nowadays, not everyone, but most people nowadays do have some sort of health insurance that can help out and take care of the medical bills. They may have copays and deductibles they have to pay, but relatively few people, at least in my experience, have any type of short-term disability insurance that pays them if they're out of work for more, if they're out of work for a period of time. And if you're out of work because you're physically injured and can't work, then unemployment doesn't kick in and pay you during that period. So if you don't have short-term disability, you don't have any income coming in. So my advice to my clients and to the general public at large is initially to preserve all of that no-fault coverage or the PIP coverage for lost wages until you know what your lost wages are going to be, and then you can release the rest of it to go ahead and pay for your medical bills at that point in time. So that you can at least make sure you got some sort of income coming in. The problem with the PIP benefits for lost wages is the cap for PIP benefits lost wages was set at $200 back in 1977 or 78 when the bill was passed, and back then, $200 was probably sufficient to cover most people's bills, $200 a week. Unfortunately, they've not made any changes to that amount, so the cap is still in 2020 is still $200 a week is the cap. So you're still losing a substantial portion of income in all likelihood, but at least $200 a week coming in is better than $0 a week coming in.
Exactly. Well, you mentioned something else about unemployment and that having to catch up. I mean, if you're a small business owner, you may not have unemployment benefits. I mean, there's some situations where person working part-time or doing some different types of jobs just may not have access to unemployment. Now that's all some of that's different right now with the coronavirus, but that's a different topic. But I know that, generally speaking, there's another risk there that you don't really even think about, until you're in a situation like this.
Yes, as I understand it, other than changes that may be implemented because of what we're going through right now with the coronavirus, but as a general rule, a business owner themselves they're not covered by unemployment benefits. From that standpoint, if you're an independent contractor, you're not covered by unemployment benefits as well. So short-term disability is something that most people, especially if you're a business owner of some type, you need to have that type of coverage.
Just a separate coverage somewhere. You mentioned obviously medical bills and lost wages. What about property damage? I mean, PIP, this personal injury protection, no fault, it does not pay for getting your car fixed, correct?
Correct. It does not pay for that. One of the other mandatory coverages in Kentucky is property damage coverage. So the at-fault drivers, as long as they have the insurance like they are supposed to have the insurance, then they are going to have a minimum of $25,000 of property damage coverage as well. Again, these minimum amounts were set back in 77, and $25,000 would pay to repair or replace most vehicles on the road back in 1977. Frankly, nowadays, if you're purchasing your own insurance, I would encourage you to bump up the limits on property damage coverage, because you can easily, if you hit a new vehicle and do a lot of damage to it, you can exceed that $25,000 of property damage coverage fairly quickly with the cost of vehicles nowadays. So, but you're going to have at least $25,000 of property damage coverage to cover your vehicle if you're not the at-fault driver in the collision. And that would only cover, the at-fault driver, the property damage doesn't cover to repair their own vehicle. That's a different sort of coverage that a person has to have on their policy to repair their own vehicle if they are the person that's at fault in causing the collision.
And again, that assumes the at-fault driver actually has insurance. And these days, that again is a risk, right?
That is a risk. In Kentucky, automobile insurance is mandatory, so every vehicle that is on the road in the state of Kentucky is supposed to have insurance coverage, and it doesn't matter if they're coming from out of state. Once they travel cross over into Kentucky, they're required to have automobile insurance coverage on that vehicle. But the fact that it's required does not mean that everybody does in fact have insurance coverage. A lot of people do let their insurance coverages lapse, and they continue to drive on the roads even with lapsed insurance coverage. And that's where some of these other coverages can come into play from that standpoint. Now, as far as property damage, you've got collision and comprehensive coverages that you can purchase that are optional insurance that you can purchase for your vehicle that will cover your vehicle and repair your vehicle if you're involved in a collision and the other person is at fault and they don't have the coverage. Now, usually there's going to be a deductible that you may have to cover for that. A lot of times I see a $500 deductible for that coverage. Or then you also have the coverage you can purchase that if you are the person that is at fault in causing the accident, it still pays to repair your vehicle that was damaged in the collision. Again, you're going to have a deductible that you're going to have to pay out of that to get your vehicle repaired, but you're not having to pay the entirety of the expense at that point in time. Yeah, but the other side of it too is that I didn't talk about earlier is on the bodily injury side. The at-fault driver, the minimum limits again are $25,000. The at-fault driver must have $25,000 of bodily injury coverage to pay for the bodily injury damage to someone else that they injure in an accident. In Kentucky, actually has what is called, or referred to at least in legal circles, as split coverage. So they'll have a per person and a per accident coverage amount. And the $25,000 is a per person amount, then $50,000 per accident. So a lot of times you'll see policy that says $25.50, and that means any one person can get up to $25,000 of bodily injury coverage if their damages reach $25,000 or above. But the insurance company will not pay more than $50,000 out on any one collision, so that if there's 4 people injured in the car that were not at fault in causing the collision, then those 4 people would split a total of $50,000 of coverage. Now, it could be
probably not a lot of money at that point.
Well, it's not a lot. It depends on your injuries, but it's not a lot of money at that point in time. But and when I say 25 is the minimum coverage. You can purchase greater amounts of coverage. Sure. You can get 50,000 or 100,000 or higher amounts of coverage on your own vehicle if you want to. The problem is the person that hits you and is at fault may not have a higher amount of coverage. So then you've got to look at protecting yourself with your own car insurance coverage that you're purchasing. Yeah. And that's where, a lot of people don't understand some of these coverages. And these are things that you need to be thinking about and actually doing before the collision occurs, because it's too late to do it after the collision occurs. But one of the coverages that's mandatory in Kentucky as well is called uninsured motorist coverage, and that's at $25,000 as well. So if a person hits you and they don't have insurance, then your own car insurance's uninsured motorist coverage will pay you for your bodily injury up to the limits of uninsured motorist coverage that you have. It could be the 25 minimum, or you can purchase a greater amount, and that's coverage you're basically purchasing to protect yourself and people who are riding in your car in case you're in a collision and the other person doesn't have any insurance, and that's mandatory coverage. And optional coverage that you can purchase is called underinsured motorist coverage.
And really what we're talking about, this, Jeff, sorry to interrupt, but this is that UM/UIM that you see on your insurance policy, right?
Exactly. UM stands for uninsured motorist coverage. UIM is underinsured motorist coverage. And underinsured motorist coverage is if the at-fault driver's insurance is $25,000 of bodily injury, but your medical bills are $50,000 and you've got $20,000 of lost wages, then your damages are well in excess of their policy limits before you even take into account pain and suffering or loss of enjoyment of life type damages. So the underinsured coverage, you can purchase that, which will pay you if the at-fault driver's insurance is not sufficient to cover all of your damages. And it also covers it will, depending on how your policy is written, it will cover the individuals in your household that are named insureds on the policy or relatives in the household, and also anyone that's in your vehicle at the time of the collision. So if your neighbor's in your vehicle at the time of the collision, they would be protected under your own insurance and possibly their own insurance as well, if in that type of collision or in that type of situation.
Well, as I'm looking at this, and we said at the outset of this episode that obviously we're dealing with the COVID-19 coronavirus, issue. Times are going to get tough for a lot of people, and people are not only worried about maintaining their jobs or some kind of income, they're also looking at cutting some expenses. And I would think probably for the next few months, the likelihood that somebody might be on the road with a lapsed insurance policy is probably a higher likelihood than normal. And that UIM coverage, I know, Jeff, you're not here to sell insurance policies. Obviously, you're not an insurance agent, but that seems like a really good step for people.
It is. I think that uninsured motorist or UM coverage is mandatory coverage, and frankly, it's like a lot of things, what you are required to purchase tends to be higher cost than the optional stuff that you don't have to, because they have to price it to entice you to want to buy that. So at least in my experience, underinsured motorist coverage is much cheaper, but bumping up above the minimum is also not as expensive as the basic coverage is a lot of times. So making sure your limits on the underinsured motorist coverage and the uninsured motorist coverage are up there is in checking what the prices are on what's the price differential if I purchase $25,000 of uninsured and $25,000 of liability coverage versus purchasing $50,000 or purchasing $100,000, because you may find that for just a few dollars more a month in premiums, or even maybe even less than a few dollars more, depending on the vehicle you have and your driving record, you may be able to double, even triple your coverage that you have if you're in an accident, and protect yourself and protect your family from potential financial ruin if you're involved in a collision that causes you to be out of work for a considerable period of time.
Well, and that's the thing. I did this years ago and talked to my agent and said, look, how much UIM could I buy? And he kind of scratched his head because people don't ask that question that often. It's just kind of general policy. Well, we always sell this. Well, okay, if I wanted more, and it was so unbelievably inexpensive, and I couldn't imagine the amount of extra coverage I was getting for, like you said, not much money, but at least I've got peace of mind. If I'm in the car, my kids are in their car, we're driving down the road and just happen to get into a collision with someone that doesn't have insurance or enough insurance, I've got something to fall back on, because I may not be able to pull that money out of pocket, to pay those bills.
Right, exactly, and a lot of people don't pay attention to the amount of coverage they have. I can't tell you the number of times that I've sat and talked to my clients, and I ask them, what kind of coverage do you have on your own vehicle? And they say, I've got great insurance. I got full coverage. And they think full coverage means they're fully insured. And what full coverage is talking about is, you have not only the mandatory coverages, but you have underinsured, and you have comprehensive, and you have collision. And the comprehensive and collision especially is part of that. And if you're paying a if you're making a car payment, the car and whoever you're making the car payment to is probably going to require that you have the comprehensive and collision to repair the damage to your vehicle if you're in a wreck with an uninsured driver, or if you're the one at fault in causing the wreck, to go ahead and repair to collect their collateral on that loan that they've given you.
Yep.
But the coverage limits themselves may still be the minimum limits of $25,000. So, I've had a lot of people in my office say, yeah, I've got great coverage, I got full coverage, and then we look at it and they have a lot of different types of insurance coverage, but their limits are $25,000 on everything, so they're actually woefully uninsured compared to where they were from that standpoint. In fact, it only happened once, but I had one person that we were looking at their policy, and they had the minimum limits on everything, but they had coverage if they ever drove in Mexico. They were covered for driving in Mexico. And I looked at that policy and I saw that's the only time I've ever seen coverage for driving in Mexico, and they thought they had great insurance. And I asked them, I said, do y'all go to Mexico quite a bit or whatever? And they'd never been to Mexico, but they had coverage if they ever happened to go there. So so they could have really bumped up their limits that they were going to use, but they were sold coverage for driving in Mexico. So you've got to look at what you're actually getting and make sure you're not only looking at what's being covered, but how much the coverage amount is for that you're being covered for.
Yeah, and that unfortunately is a very bad surprise, I would think, for a lot of people sitting across the desk with you when the time comes down to have those kind of conversations. Yeah. And, I hope this episode, it's a little different from what you may have been expecting, but Jeff handles a lot of things after the collision, and hopefully you found some value, maybe some useful nuggets in this episode to help you be prepared before you get out there on the road, before you get out there and enjoy going down to the lake or wherever you're going to go on vacation, if we're able to do that here soon. But at the same time, understand your numbers. Jeff is a fantastic negotiator. He as an attorney, as a personal injury attorney, deals with these issues every day, and they're pretty complicated, especially when there's a lot on the line. And I might tell you, if you've got a question, sit down and talk to your agent, or give Jeff a call and talk about, hey, is this possible? Because if you're in an accident, I mean, it's going to come down to insurance coverage, and the worst thing, Jeff, I would imagine the worst thing is to be told, hey, there's simply not enough insurance to deal with this. And
exactly,
that's going to be horrible.
Yeah, the worst thing is that there's not enough insurance coverage even to take care of all the medical expenses
for an accident.
And I've had that.
Yeah, for an accident
that wasn't your fault, and I've seen that occur at time or two, and having that conversation with the client's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah. Jeff, as we close out this episode, any final words of advice you might give to somebody who's, maybe got some new drivers getting ready to hit the road, or have been around for a while, but getting ready to make some of those longer drives we haven't done in a while because of this whole coronavirus kind of shutdown? Any words of advice as we kind of get back out there?
Yeah, obviously keep your eyes on the road ahead of you. Watch the other drivers. Maintain, keep your speed under control, and it's try just to be as safe as you can. Pay attention to other drivers and use your blinkers. It's just I'm amazed at how many brand new cars there are out there that apparently don't have operating blinkers on them.
Well, that's an upgrade. That's an upgrade.
Yeah, apparently it's optional equipment now. I didn't realize that. But use your blinkers and pay attention to the vehicles in front of you and the vehicles approaching you from the other direction. And when you're coming to a stoplight, look at the other cars. And one of the things that I notice around where I drive, and then I go, my daughter's in Louisville now, so I'm driving in Louisville more than I ever have in the past. And one of the things that I've realized, especially up in that city, is that when a light turns red, if you're waiting for a light to turn red at an intersection before you go, you might want to wait another second or two before you take off. Somebody may honk at you beforehand, but it's amazing how many cars I see cross through that intersection on the light that just went from yellow to red after it's already switched to red. So take a little bit of time. It's not going to kill the person behind you if they have to take one more second before they get started back down the road, and it may save you and the passengers in your car a lot of grief.
I would think so. Jeff, buddy, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. We're going to have another episode here in about 2 weeks, but I hope this information is helpful. Again, today we kind of talked a little bit about the insurance coverages that are so important anytime a collision's happening. We talked about personal injury protection. Some people call it PIP. Some people call it no-fault coverage. We talked a little bit about uninsured and underinsured, this UM coverage that you can actually buy to help protect yourself and those that are in the vehicle with you. And again, when it comes down to it, if you need a good attorney and all throughout Western Kentucky, Jeff, your office is in Murray, but you don't just stay in Murray, do you, in terms of the cases you handle?
No, my office is in Murray, but probably the majority of my clients are outside of the Murray area. I'm one of the few attorneys in Western Kentucky that concentrates their practice on a personal injury practice. So I get clients from all over Western Kentucky: Graves County, McCracken County, Trigg County, Marshall County, Christian County, Lyon County, the river counties. I travel a pretty wide swath in my practice.
Fantastic. Well, again, Jeff, I know you're busy, buddy. I really appreciate it. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.